At my son's graduation, my parents dropped a bombshell. They announced they were redirecting his college fund to benefit my nephew instead. My husband chuckled and said, "Funny, we already transferred it last month." I still remember that moment when everything fell apart. We were enjoying a nice dinner at a steakhouse to celebrate my son Liam's high school graduation, a milestone he earned through hard work in advanced classes, extracurriculars, and part-time jobs, all while being accepted into his dream university. The celebration turned sour almost immediately. Right after our drinks were served, my mom picked up her glass, gave it a little tap with her fork, and with a self-satisfied smile declared, "We have an announcement. Liam's college fund is now going to his cousin Ryan because he needs it more." I froze while my husband, David, gripped his fork tighter. Liam's face drained of color, and my younger daughter, sitting next to him, looked between us in confusion. My dad simply nodded as if this decision made perfect sense, adding that it was for the greater good of the family. Ryan, my nephew, my brother's son, had always been their favorite, the kid they had bailed out of trouble over and over again. I could feel my anger rising from years of keeping quiet about how my kids were always treated as an afterthought compared to my brother's son. That's when it all started to boil over. David was quicker to react. He leaned back in his chair, took a sip of his beer, and laughed. "Isn't it ironic? We already moved the money last month." My mom blinked, and my dad's smile faded. My mom's voice sharpened with disbelief, but David only grinned and explained, "Yeah, we anticipated this move, so we transferred Liam's fund out of their control weeks ago." Then chaos erupted. My mom's face turned bright red. I thought she might faint. "You had no right," she shrieked. My dad banged his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "You can't do that. That money was meant for family." I finally found my voice. "Liam is family, and that fund belongs to him. You had no say in it. You're being selfish." My mom snapped back. "Ryan needs this more. You know how rough it's been for your brother. We're fixing his life, and you're ruining it." That was when it hit me. They never really intended the money for Liam. They've been waiting for the perfect moment to swoop in and seize it. I looked at Liam, who was staring at them in utter shock. He'd grown up knowing his grandparents never really cared for him, but this was on another level. It was proof that in their eyes, he didn't even matter. It broke something inside me. "Fixing things?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "Do you mean like when Ryan stole from us? Or when he got arrested and you paid his bail? Or when he wrecked my brother's car and you replaced it?" My dad growled, "That's not the same thing. Ryan's been struggling. Your brother is a single dad doing his best, and I'm a mom doing mine." I shot back. "And you just told my son on one of the most important days of his life that his future doesn't matter, that you were stealing his chance at the life he earned." My mom scoffed. "Oh, please, Liam can take out loans like everyone else." That was the moment I knew there was no turning back. Liam jumped to his feet so quickly that his chair scraped the floor. With a voice that trembled but was firm, he declared, "I don't need anything from you. I don't need your money, and I definitely don't need you in my life." David stood up too, placing a comforting hand on Liam's shoulder, and said calmly, "We owe them not another minute of our time." I rose as well, telling my parents, "This is your last chance. You have shown who you really are, and today you made sure we'll never forget it." And with that, we walked out. They screamed after us, called us ungrateful, and accused us of tearing the family apart. But looking at Liam, with his head held high despite the pain in his eyes, I knew we had done the right thing. I had no idea just how far my parents would go to get that money back. We left the restaurant, knowing nothing would ever be the same. And soon the phone started ringing nonstop with furious voicemails from my mom, ranting about how we'd betrayed the family. My dad left a few aggressive messages warning, "You'll regret this." Then, 2 days later, my brother sent a text saying, "I don't know what's going on, but Ryan needs that money more than Liam does. You're being selfish." That was all he said. No questions, no explanations. I didn't reply. The real trouble began a week after dinner when David received a call from our bank. I was in the kitchen when I heard him say, "Excuse me, what withdrawal?" I felt my stomach drop. The call lasted another minute or so, and when David hung up, his face was set in anger. They had tried to access Liam's fund. I grabbed the counter, stunned. Were your parents really calling the bank, pretending to be us, and saying we'd authorized a family emergency withdrawal? I could barely breathe. David shook his head, saying the bank flagged the transaction, noticed something was off, and called me first. I wanted to scream at the nerve and audacity of it all. Without a second thought, I grabbed my phone, dialed my dad's number, and as soon as he answered, I exploded. You actually tried to steal from us. What's wrong with you? My dad didn't sound guilty at all. You left us no choice, he said, adding, we wouldn't have had to do that if you weren't being so unreasonable. I nearly hurled my phone across the room. Unreasonable? You try to commit fraud? It's our money, my dad snapped back. We contributed to it. That struck me cold. My mom interjected, you think you did all of this by yourself? You think we never put anything into that fund? I clenched my fists. You never contributed a single cent to Liam's fund. You're misremembering. My dad replied smoothly, and if we took this to court, I guarantee they'd agree that we have a right to it. My blood ran cold. David stepped closer, saying, they wouldn't win. They have no legal grounds, but I wasn't so sure. My parents were liars, bold, manipulative liars, and if they were willing to go that far, what else were they planning? 3 days later, as we pulled into our driveway, I spotted a thick envelope on our doorstep. I picked it up and, upon seeing the return address, felt sick. It was from a lawyer. I rushed inside with shaking hands and tore it open. David was in the living room, asking, what's that? I scanned the pages. By the time I finished, my hands trembled too much to hold the paper steady. They're suing us, I whispered. David's eyes snapped up as he read. They're claiming they co-funded Liam's college savings and that we illegally transferred the money without their consent. My voice grew loud. They're saying they own part of the fund? David leapt to his feet, grabbing the documents, his face darkening as he read. This is complete crap, he muttered. But I wasn't convinced because my parents were experts at twisting the truth until they made themselves out to be the victims. And in a legal fight, they might just have enough proof. For the next few days, we scrambled to collect every piece of documentation, bank statements, transfer records, every deposit ever made into that account. Then, at the next lawyer meeting, my parents dropped their bombshell. They produced a receipt from over a decade ago, a single deposit of $2,000 made when Liam was a baby. They sat there smugly as their lawyer argued that because they had contributed something to the fund, they had the right to challenge how the money was allocated. $2,000? I nearly laughed. You really think that gives you control over the entire fund? My mom smiled sweetly. It was a contribution. Without it, you wouldn't have built up such a savings account. I was livid. David, who had calmed down a bit, said, so you're telling me that because you made a one-time gift over 10 years ago, you now get to decide who the money goes to? My dad nodded in agreement. I could have screamed. After weeks of struggle, the court finally ruled that although my parents had no control over the fund, their $2,000 contribution had to be returned with interest. It was a minor victory. They couldn't touch the fund, but it still felt like a loss because the message was clear. My parents would go to any lengths to punish us for refusing their control, and they weren't finished yet. Not even 2 weeks after the ruling, David came home looking pale. They reported us, he said. I blinked. Reported us? He explained, they told the IRS we committed tax fraud. I stopped breathing. They had informed the IRS that we'd been hiding money and misreporting funds for years. I gripped the counter. This was insane. David nodded grimly. Yeah, now we're under investigation. At that moment, I realized this wasn't just about the money. It was war. My parents were determined to destroy us. And if they wanted to fight, they were about to get one. I thought the lawsuit was the worst part, that losing a chunk of money to our greedy, self-righteous parents was as bad as it could get. I was wrong. When the IRS showed up at our door, I understood that my parents weren't merely trying to grab funds. They were trying to ruin our lives. The IRS investigation began with a formal letter stating that our finances were under review due to suspected tax discrepancies. David was the first to read it. He exhaled sharply and handed it to me without saying a word. I scanned it, my hands trembling. This can't be real, I whispered. Oh, it's real, David muttered. Soon after came a phone call from a polite but firm IRS agent. explaining that an anonymous tip had flagged us for hidden assets and fraudulent transfers. We knew who was behind it, but proving it was another story. For weeks, we were buried in paperwork. Years of tax records, bank statements, everything that could clear our name. Luckily, our finances were clean, but the investigation wasn't easy. The worst part was its impact on Liam's financial aid. His college account was flagged because of the IRS review, temporarily putting his scholarship disbursements on hold. My parents hadn't just tried to seize his college fund. They were trying to ruin his future. That was my breaking point. If they wanted war, I was ready to fight back. I started digging, knowing that my parents had secrets. I'd seen them twist stories and manipulate everyone around them, and if they wanted to play dirty, I could too. It didn't take long to uncover something interesting. While they always acted like the responsible ones, the financial backbone of the family, years ago David had helped them set up a small rental property investment, handling all the paperwork and tax filings. And guess what? They've been underreporting the rental income for years. They thought they were untouchable, but they'd been careless. I decided to take action. I didn't report them immediately. First, I called my mom. When she answered on the second ring, her tone was smug. "So, you're finally ready to apologize?" she teased. I almost laughed. "No, I'm calling to tell you I found real tax fraud in this family." There was a long silence before she scoffed. "What are you talking about? Your rental income? The money you forgot to report for the past 15 years. Her voice faltered. "You have no idea what you're saying." "Oh, I do," I replied coldly. "And so does the IRS. Unless you drop this crap and call off the dogs." The change in her tone was immediate. She mumbled, "You wouldn't." I challenged, "Try me." And before she could say more, she hung up. 2 days later, we received a call from the IRS informing us that our case was no longer a priority. A week after that, Liam's college funds were unfrozen. They had backed off for now. But I knew they wouldn't let it end there. And I was right. Late one night, while David and I were asleep, the sound of shattering glass jolted us awake. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming until I heard footsteps inside our house. David immediately grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the bed and signaled for me to call 911. My hand was shaking so badly, I nearly dropped my phone. Then we heard a voice, "Mom, Dad, Liam." Panic surged through me when I realized Liam had heard the noise and was coming downstairs, despite David shouting for him to stay in his room. We stepped into the hallway just as Liam reached the stairs, and there he was, Ryan, staggering into our living room, drunk, eyes wild and desperate, holding a crowbar. For a moment, no one moved. Then Ryan staggered forward and slurred, "Where is it?" David tightened his grip on the bat and demanded, "Where's what, the money?" Ryan shouted back, his voice breaking, "I deserve it. They promised it to me." That was when I realized my parents had sent him. They knew they couldn't legally access the money. So after losing, they sent their precious grandson to do their dirty work. Ryan advanced, crowbar raised slightly. "You think you could just take what's mine?" Liam stepped forward, fists clenched, and said steadily, "It was never yours." Despite the fear in his eyes, he continued, "Now get out." Ryan laughed bitterly. "Oh yeah? What are you going to do about it?" That's when David swung the bat, not at Ryan, but hard against the wall beside him. The crash snapped Ryan out of his drunken haze. His eyes widened, and without another word, he bolted out the front door. The police arrived about 10 minutes later, and Ryan was arrested for attempted burglary. My parents bailed him out before dawn, and then my mom had the nerve to call me, accusing, "You've gone too far. You had him arrested." I almost laughed. "He broke into our home with a weapon. That's on you," I replied. She fell silent for a long moment before whispering, "You'll regret this." For the first time, I truly believed her. 2 weeks after the break-in, my brother reached out wanting to meet because he felt things had gone too far. "Mom and Dad are a mess, and Ryan's a mess. We need to talk," he said over the phone, his voice exhausted. I almost refused, but David convinced me that this might be our chance to get some real answers. Reluctantly, we agreed to a family meeting in my parents' house that Sunday. It felt like walking into a battlefield. David and I arrived first while Liam refused to join, saying, "I'm done with him." I couldn't blame him. My parents sat stiffly on the couch, their faces cold. My mom looked drawn and tense, and my dad wouldn't even look at us. Then my brother arrived with Ryan, and I tensed immediately. Ryan looked gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes. His usual cocky swagger had been replaced by vulnerability. My mom motioned for everyone to sit, but I remained standing. "Let's just get this over with," my brother said, glancing sideways. "We all messed up." David scoffed. "Yeah, we messed up." "I didn't mean it like that," my brother quickly added. "I mean, this isn't what Mom and Dad wanted." I let out a bitter laugh. They wanted to steal from my son. They wanted to use Ryan to break into our house. So, please tell me, what exactly did they not want? That's when Ryan finally spoke, his voice hoarse. I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he muttered. I thought it was mine." His words made me feel sick. "You thought it was yours? Why?" he stuttered, then looked at my mom, and I saw it, the guilt in her eyes. David noticed it too and leaned forward, his voice dangerously calm. "Tell us, Ryan, why did you believe it was yours?" Ryan hesitated and nervously glanced at my mom. Suddenly it hit me. "Oh my God," I whispered. "You told him, didn't you?" My mom flinched. I turned to Ryan, my heart pounding. "They told you it was already yours, right? That Liam's fund wasn't just being given to you, but that you always thought it was yours." Ryan's eyes darted around, and his face went pale. My mom tried to speak, but before he could finish, she snapped, "We had to do it. He was struggling, and your uncle was struggling. We had to give him hope." I couldn't believe it. "So you lied to him? You told him his future was secured with money that was never his." My dad finally interjected sharply. "What does it matter? You had plenty. You and David had good jobs, a house, a stable life. Ryan had nothing." I then yelled, "What kind of parents are you? You have 2 kids, yet you've always treated me like a second-class citizen while giving everything to him. Now you expect me to just hand over my son's future because of your guilt?" My mom stood abruptly. "We did what we had to do." I spat back. "No, you did what you always do. You chose my brother over me, and this time you got caught." Silence filled the room. Ryan shook his head, his face crumbling as he whispered, "You lied to me." He looked at my mom as if seeing her for the first time. "Ryan," she started to say, reaching for him, but he backed away. No, you promised me. You swore I wouldn't have to worry about college, that I was all set." He glanced at my dad, whose silence spoke volumes. Ryan let out a shaky laugh and then turned to me. "I'm sorry." And for the first time, I saw in his eyes the realization, regret, and understanding that he had been used just as much as we had been hurt. He walked out, and I didn't stop him. My parents tried to justify everything. They ranted and raved, claiming I was overreacting and tearing the family apart. I simply said, "We're done." And I meant it. My brother later reached out once, apologizing and admitting he'd let things go too far by believing our parents. But I wasn't ready to forgive. Ryan, surprisingly, managed to stay out of further trouble. He got a job and enrolled in community college. Whether it was guilt, shame, or a real wake-up call, I'll never know, but I hoped he learned his lesson. As for Liam, he went off to college, the one he earned through his own hard work. My parents never saw a penny of that money, and we never saw them again. Cutting ties with your own parents, even ones who never really cared for you the way they should, hurts like losing someone, but sometimes it's better to bury the past rather than let it keep hurting you. And that's exactly what I chose to do.